It's very interesting to read Bloodchild after passing. Not to mention Homegoing Frankenstein, Hopeful Monsters, I'm No Longer Here. All in various ways expose hidden systemic violence of history, racism, colonialism, patriarchy, these larger systems of exploitation. Like climate change, are hard to notice because we're so myopically focused on the individual. What fiction allows storytellers to do is use intricate plots to compress systemic social historical forces in ways that might seem implausible on the day-to-day reality level, but um, actually are revealing of deeper realities on the larger systemic level. So we need literature like this because we really are struggling, as climate change in particular, not to mention, put our rampant political strife. Bloodchild offers a very complex view of family beyond good and evil. Just like family is what works in nature. And the complexities of the alliances and interdependencies. I think William Blake's poem, The Sick Rose, is helpful for thinking about the ecological perspective beyond good and evil in Bloodchild. The invisible worm that flies in the night in the howling storm has found out thy bed of crimson joy, and his dark secret love does thy life destroy. What's ecological here is Blake's playing with these social norms, these normative ideals, the rose, health, wholesome love versus illness, diseased love, venereal disease, or the sick family, like Blake is writing here in his poems about chimney sweepers and in the midst of the social destruction and exploitation of the slave trade, and industrial factory work. But Blake here is saying the supposed illness has a love of its own. That's pretty interesting. So he's really playing with our ideals of like the rose is a symbol of love. No, maybe the illness, the disease is a symbol of love. There's something self-stultifying about that moralism, according to Nietzsche. Dividing the world into black and white, good and bad. It's just a way of not paying attention to details. For instance, we are learning now about how illness tests our social bonds in a lot of different levels, right? I've thought it's interesting to think about all the illness that surrounds involved in relationships. Certainly maternal love involves lots of sickness, managing sickness. So Butler takes this broad, non-moral, ecological point of view that sees nature, as, again, and to see nature non-moralistically is to recognize that everything's there for a reason. Like things don't exist except because they fit into larger complex patterns of interdependence. So it's an expansive way of thinking about family. The Bloodchild is about testing a certain boundary of what is tolerable, what's an intolerable kind of family, or social system to perpetuate. Now, this may sound weird, but I'm not so sure it's that different from any coming of age story. What these different organisms are explaining, or what their different narrative perspectives are offering, is explanation of this ecological interdependence and mutual back scratching, and how complex that can be, and how that's just, in a way, I think, a negotiation of boundary that is part of reproduction across the generations. It's just what's entailed by having our prolonged childhood, in which we're not alone. Lots of creatures have this extended childhood protected, where we're allowed and encouraged to play and explore in a kind of safe space. And this childhood period gives way to something like a metamorphosis, like you could call puberty that, right? And we then turn into a different stage, which has to do with this recognition of the imperatives of reality, the limits of reality, mortality, these more systemic, again, imperatives and costs of the social system that we're reproducing, that we're perpetuating by participating in. So I would respond to Greta Thunberg saying, I don't like the system of reproduction that you've brought me into. The house is on fire. A boundary has been crossed. New model of family needs to be enacted that's reactive to this crisis. And passing is about the lethality of race, systemic violence, just like Frankenstein is about the lethality of patriarchy. Claire almost seems to know that the system of race is eating her up. And it's eating up the narrator, too. Irene and Brian quarrel over talking to the kids about sex and race. And these are very cut and dry issues for Brian. In his perhaps simplistic masculine way, is that sex is a joke and he should learn about it as soon as possible, including what a joke it is, and that you should learn about what they call the race problem, lynching. And Irene wants to protect him from both the dirty realities of sex and violence. But Irene, at the same time, is consumed with thoughts of sex and race. And this question of what is dangerous, her ambivalence between, being scared and repulsed and hurt by Claire and being so drawn to her. It's a book about negotiating a kind of social boundaries and social pathologies. We're really testing it's really exploring how we as a culture are kind of eating ourselves up, how much violence is implicit, again, in our social norms of reproduction. And, so much of the violence here is self-perpetuated, born of fear, born of desire, sort of spoiling into fear. Whereas in Bloodchild, there's no gratuitous violence, right? It's all about sort of mutual accommodation. Coming back to the ongoing theme of this class, these texts are about embodiment. And, that's always going to involve surprise. in any life, in any embodied lifetime, is going to involve horror. And none of us will be spared the experience Gon describes of hearing a scream unlike any other human thing had screamed before. Our capacity for horror is, part of our evolution too, and part of our bonding too.